And when I got out of there, I ended up getting a couple of other training classes, and then finally ended up here or in Chicago at Glenview Naval Air Station, going to combat information training with radars, which is the big thing in those days. And very important thing, I met Charlie Paulus there, and he called me when I moved here and reminded me that we had met 50-some years before. I hadn't seen him since then, so we've become friends again here. More importantly, I met my wife, who was then a co-ed at Northwestern, and took a while to get her interested enough in me, but we did meet, and that was the beginning of my the other half of my life. We ended up out in Hawaii, and then I joined the Boxer, an aircraft carrier, and I was by then I was a air controller, so I was controlling squadrons of aircraft up in the air. And the Boxer at that time, the war was pretty much over, I think, at that point in 1953, 54, but we were still in the war zone. I was just telling the admiral, I said, my admiral at that time was very nice to all of us because he made sure we were in the war zone every month, so we got an extra $100 a month, and that made a lot of people happy. And then we were, at that point, we were going up and down the straits between Taiwan and China, and I think the two islands there were Quemoy and Matsu that we were trying to protect. And I don't think if you read the newspaper or watch the news today, it's the same thing. Our ships are out there going up and down protecting Taiwan. When I got out of the Navy in 1956, I ended up going back to the Palmer House in Chicago. They had offered me a job when I went in the service, and I said, yes, I'm ready now. And so that was the beginning of my career. I think that I had a very interesting career. I'm not going to talk to you a lot about what I did piece by piece, but I think I would like to tell you a few stories about some of the various jobs that I had, because I think I had a number of interesting jobs and interesting occurrences. So after I got back to Chicago, I first convinced my wife to marry me, and we did get married in 1957. And then I was at the Palmer House, and I was a room clerk back there again, which I had done when I was in high school. It wasn't very exciting, but it was time to learn the business. And then I got into the sales department and learned another side of the business. And then they decided to send me to Washington, D.C., where we opened a new sales office in Washington, D.C., where I was responsible for calling on all of the businesses there, primarily the lobbyists. At that time, it's kind of an interesting number, there were about 300 licensed lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I am told there are now 20,000. And those are the people that are keeping our congressmen busy. One of the things that I remember from those days, people would call me from the various hotels and say, well, you know, have you called on the Teamsters yet? Have you called on the Teamsters? They were a very good convention to have. And I finally got over there, and the big thing everybody wanted to know was, did you see the conference table in their boardroom? Because it's, when I did finally see it, Jimmy Hoffa had a conference table built. It was like, I think, 16 feet long and all one piece of wood and all that. It was quite dramatic. The Teamsters lived it up very high there. And then I ended up getting transferred back. I called my boss in Chicago and I said, well, am I going to be here a while now? I've rented an apartment, but if I'm going to be here a little while, I'll buy a house. And he said, oh yeah, you're going to be here a long time. So I bought a house, and then I think August, and then in November he called and said, we're moving you. So that was about par for the course for the next 19 years. But I did go back to the Palmer House as the executive assistant manager, a real management job, and those jobs, those things that I learned in the Navy came in handy. The first classes I took at Philadelphia Naval Yard was damage control. And the first week I was back in the hotel, I was overnight, staying overnight while my boss was out of town. And somebody fell asleep with a cigarette on his bed, and we had a very serious fire with people putting their sheets out the window and pictures in the papers the next day on the front page about our fire. So it was kind of exciting. And then I had an opportunity during that time. I was really the assistant to the manager of the hotel, and they were investing $12 million to upgrade the hotel, which was built in 1929. So it needed some upgrading, and we did a major renovation, and I was responsible. We created a towers, which I think I was really the only one at that time that, except for the Waldorf Astoria, which had the Waldorf Towers for many years, but we were kind of unique at that time. And we had a wonderful nightclub, the Empire Room, which unfortunately went out of business long, long ago, all because of musicians' union costs just got beyond the cost. But before that happened, I did get a few points from my wife for being in the hotel business, because I took her to dinner at the Empire Room one night, and Maurice Chevalier got on his knees and sang to her. So I got that. It was a good one for me. Just as a side note, in the hotel business, back in the day when I started, really most of the big city hotels were owned by individuals, and some of them were in chains like Hilton, but most of them were individually owned. And even the hotels like Hilton, they were owned by the company. The building in the hotel was owned by the company. But about that time, we started having management contracts whereby somebody would say, I want to build a hotel and I want to own it, but you can manage it for us. And that turned into a good business for Hilton and some other companies. And then a few years later, we came up with the franchising idea for hotels, which hadn't really been done then. Now it's almost all the hotels, but it was quite significant. And so there were really three different kinds of hotels. But at that time, I was at the Palmer House, and it was an owned hotel. In 1965, I guess it was, they transferred me to St. Paul, Minnesota, and I became my first general manager's job, a big deal in the hotel business, where I was a top man in the hotel, was in St. Paul, where hotel was under construction, brand new hotel, very nice. I was the youngest hotel manager in the chain at that time, so that was a big deal. And I was there for a year while it was being built, and had a lot of say in how the hotel ended up being put together. We had a revolving restaurant on the roof and a down the beachcombers restaurant in the lower level, and I got that opportunity to design my own apartments. In those days, the hotel companies like Hilton had their managers living in the hotels. Those days they thought in the hotel business, I still think it's a good idea to have a manager live there. He's available for all kinds of problems. Most of them are not run that way now because they're not owned by the hotel company. Yeah, let's put up the Palmer House. So that's the Palmer House where I worked, and that's the lobby, a very famous picture of a very famous hotel at the time.
I just want to make sure everyone can hear you.
Uh-huh.
Can everyone hear?
Are you hearing me back there? Okay. While I'm taking a break, I'm going to take a swig of this. So I got a call while I was up there before the hotel was built. We didn't have very many people working there, myself, and I had an engineer to keep an eye on the construction and a few other people, but mostly we had the personnel people starting to interview and hire. But I didn't have a controller. And then my boss called me from Chicago and said, well, we need to have the next year's budget. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell? I've always worked with budgets, but I've never had to make one. And so my first opportunity as a general manager of a hotel was to create a budget from scratch. And it was kind of interesting. I then found myself going back to my books from Cornell and finding out of all the proper percentages and the way things ought to run, and put together something that actually came out pretty close to the way the first year's operation. It was very exciting. So my wife and my, by then, 2 children moved into the hotel with me, and we lived in hotels then for 10 or 11 years after that. It was a kind of an unusual way to raise children, but they have over the years decided that it worked out very well for them. They had to move quite a few times, and they think it helped them a lot in their lives. I hope that's true, because it's not easy for them to come home from school and go up in the elevator to their apartment with an elevator full of drunks. So we opened that hotel in the fall of 65 or 6. And it's kind of a tradition to throw the key away when a hotel opens to signify that you're never closed. And believe me, sometimes when you're the manager, you're thinking it never is closed. It never is. The first, I think I skipped a page here. No. So we threw away the key, and the first year there, we threw it away by we had balloons. What do you call them? We put notes in about 200 balloons, and let them up in the air. And in the note said, "We will give a free weekend at the new the Hilton St. Paul if you, from the farthest away, that we get a note." And of course, no notes came. I was quite disappointed. I thought we were going to get our picture in the paper. And about 2 months later, I get a call from a guy on an Indian reservation up in Canada. And he said, "I have to tell you, we've got a note here, and is this true? Does the finder of this note get a weekend at the hotel?" And I said, "Yes, it does." And he said, "Well, the son of one of our Indian traders here was out checking the trap lines, and he found this deflated balloon there with the note in it. And he says, 'Does he qualify?' And I said, 'Absolutely.' This couldn't have been better news for me that somebody was there." So we had him come down from, my wife and I actually went up, I've lost my place here. My wife and I flew to Ely, Minnesota, which is as far as you can fly in the north in the United States. And then the Indian trader came down and picked up us on a private plane. He flew us up to the Indian reservation, and we went the last 10 miles, I think, over a frozen lake by snowmobile. And we got to the village and found the boy and his family, a wife and a father. And we brought them back down. I had a photographer from Life magazine, Time magazine at that time, who was with us taking pictures all the way. And we had them in the hotel for the long weekend. And the father wanted to ride an elephant. So the zoo kept the zoo open an extra day. Front page newspaper. And then the son wanted to ride a fire truck. Fire department brought the fire truck to the hotel. He rode a fire truck around town. So another newspaper story. And it was very interesting. This whole family, the first time they'd seen a revolving door, they'd never seen an elevator or an escalator. None of that stuff existed in their lifetime. So it was quite exciting for them as well.
Tell me when you want me to go to the next slide.
Yeah, that's St. Paul I'm talking about now. The reason that I'm getting confused here is that I got my notes confused. So anyway, one of the other things that happened, we never got our pictures in Time magazine for that wonderful, we got a lot of PR on that, but something happened in India, so they didn't want to run a story about Indians, and so we didn't get our into the Time magazine. But during that time, my wife, this is St. Paul where we were living, and my wife gave me a Christmas gift. She gave me a canvas, painting canvas, and a menu, a certificate to take a painting class. And I said, what's this? And she said, well, I think you have some artistic ability. I said, I've never been interested in it, so why would you think that? But anyway, she said, I've seen you drawing the menu covers and telling the artist what you want and drawing the ad. She said, I think you should do it. So I did. I fell in love with it, and I was painting for 50 years. And if you stay till the end of my talk, you'll see some of my pictures. I'm not Irish, but St. Paul is an Irish town. You probably think of Minneapolis as Swedish, basically Swedish and German. But St. Paul was started basically by the Catholic Church in order to compete with the Swedish Lutherans in Minneapolis. And so a friend of mine ran an Irish restaurant in town, and he and I thought we needed more business in the winter and come to downtown St. Paul. And he and I came up with the idea of having a St. Patrick's Day parade. So we did, started at my hotel bar, went around town past his bar, and ended up at my hotel bar. And I would say that first year we probably had 2 hay wagons, on which he was the captain in one of them, and maybe 50 or 100 people watching. And in 2017, there were 50,000 people attending that thing, so it's become a great big thing in St. Paul. When I went back to St. Paul in 1970s, after it had been in business about 20 years, it was so successful that the manager of the Hilton Hotel closed the bar, which was the reason that we had started the whole business, was to get business for the bar, and he closed it because it was so much business and they would break all the glasses. So times changed. So anyway, I was pretty well regarded by my company at that point, and the board of directors of the St. Paul Hotel liked me, and so I think my company decided, well, if I get that board happy, I'll get another board happy. So they sent me to Washington, D.C. to manage the Washington Hilton. It didn't work. That's the best I can say. I moved to Washington on April 1st, and they were having, the business was not so great. And we'd had 4 managers there in 4 years. I was the 4th. And on April the 4th, Martin Luther King was murdered, assassinated. So that was a major problem for the city. The town went up in flames. All the businesses were closing down for a better part of a week. Our ballroom was closed. The airport was closed. The gas stations were closed, so people couldn't come in. The airport was not working, so there was no way to get a drink in the hotel, so business was not good. And we just, for weeks, we got nothing but phone calls canceling conventions for years and years ahead. So I wasn't going to make a board very happy. We didn't close, and we did keep working. Just everything was a struggle. It would be years before the business really would return properly to Washington. At that time, Lyndon Johnson was president, and we still had the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the next year Nixon was president. We hosted 2 balls in the Hilton that year. We had 2 inaugural balls, and that night we had my wife and I were welcoming the Nixons to come to the ballroom for their big event, and we had my wife and I and the entire cabinet and the Supreme Court and the president and his wife and just little old Diana and I. So we had quite an exciting night that night. And then we had a very successful public relations event. I'm into public relations because they do help in hotels. You know, we had a wonderful tennis club in the hotel, and about 6 courts, and a lot of members of Congress, and people like Katharine Graham were members. And so I arranged for a tournament of the Republican congressman versus the Democratic congressman. And General Westmoreland was our referee. And so, we thought we could get some news out of that. And some of you remember Spiro Agnew, who was vice president at the time. Not well remembered or well regarded, I guess. But anyway, he hit his partner. He was playing doubles, and he hit his partner on the head, and the partner had to retire from the game. And that did get in the papers because the week before, Agnew had played a golf tournament and had hit somebody in the head with a golf ball. So we got our picture in the paper again. But in the end, I have to say the owners who were from New York, the board of directors wasn't very happy with me because I wasn't able to fill the hotel. We were still struggling through trying to find ways to bring back business to Washington, D.C. I was just one of many hotels that were all experiencing the same problem. So I knew I was about to lose my job. I was looking for work somewhere, and I knew that I was about to lose my job. The Hilton vice president was going to fire me, and Betsy, where are you? Are you here, Betsy? Yeah, your uncle was going to fire me. Now she's my next door neighbor. Anyway, he didn't get around to doing it. Somebody decided I was worth saving, and instead of firing me, they ended up sending me to the Beverly Hilton, which is a great hotel. I had different problems to deal with there because we didn't have a fire, but the year before, a couple of years before, the Century Plaza Hotel had opened, a brand new, wonderful hotel, and stole a lot of the business from the Beverly Hilton. And so I had to reverse that trend. That was my job. And in those days, food and beverage was a pretty important part. I think it still is for a hotel to have good food and beverage operation. And I hope it was in there because the chef was making more than I was. So I said, we have to work on our food and beverage and improve it. And I made him work pretty hard to earn his money. And we did. Within the next year, we got the Oscars award dinner back. And that was really the beginning. And then the Hollywood people said, okay, we'll come back with some of our meetings and some of our dinners. And so that was the beginning. The rooftop restaurant was called Le Scoffier, and it had had its better days. The hotel was about 15 years old. And I told my food and beverage team, and I said, we need to get some awards here in this restaurant. So we worked, and I hired a new chef who was a terrific older fellow, but he was great, and a new restaurant maitre d'. He was terrific. He was an alcoholic about every 2 months and disappear for a week. But the rest of the time, he was there, and he was terrific. And within 2 years, we were listed as the best restaurant in Los Angeles. So we made great progress, and that really did make the difference for the whole business. And then I would say in the early, I was there starting in 70 from 70 to 75. And in the early 70s, the Japanese started letting their citizens travel. They were limited in how much money they could take out of the country. And so they were mostly coming with Japan Airlines package tours. And so I thought, well, I need this business because we don't have enough yet. And so I went and found the manager of the Japan Airlines that was in charge of handling them in Los Angeles. And we actually became pretty good friends. And so we pretty soon had busloads of Japanese arriving, which created a whole new set of problems. First of all, I didn't have any Japanese-speaking staff, so I had to hire some of that. But more importantly, I had found all my bathrooms were leaking into the floor below. And we had to hire somebody to go on board the buses when they arrived at the hotel and explain to these Japanese tourists how to use an American bathroom. In Japan, you bathe yourself outside the tub, and then you get in the tub, and you rinse yourself outside the tub, and it goes down a drain. But we don't have those drains in this country. So we had a big problem for the beginning, but in the end, it turned out to be very good business for us. And they also had trouble understanding how our toilets work because they didn't have any of that type. And it's kind of interesting now, if you want to buy an expensive toilet, they're all made in Japan. In those days, they didn't even have them. Anyway, I gave the Japanese airlines representative a plaque with a photograph of him, and thank you for all the business he gave us, which paid off a number of years later when I had left Hilton and was with Radisson. I opened a hotel in Tokyo and called on him to help us find some business, and he was, again, a big help for me, finding business when it didn't exist. But I was still at the Beverly Hilton, and Conrad Hilton, who was, of course, the founder of Hilton Hotels, had an office across the street, and he started calling me because he saw things were improving, and he would call and he wanted to get an update, and I'd give him the newest information, and he'd call and he'd want to have dinner, and then he'd come over and he'd invite himself to dinner and want to have it in my apartment. So he liked my wife. Of course, he liked good-looking women, so of course he liked my wife. And he'd invite himself, and we'd have him and his girl, movie star lady friends in the house. And I think when I was working in Washington, when the Iranians were the good guys. And we used to go to the Iranian embassy quite often, and they were very big on selling you caviar, and I learned to like it very well. And then Mr. Hilton liked it, so I was able to buy some caviar and have it there when he'd come, and my wife and I could gorge on it for another week or two. I wasn't making much money, but I was living very high on the hog. You know, some of you probably know that Conrad had been married to Zsa Zsa Gabor, also in the movie business, a Hungarian, and they had a lot of problems, and of course the hotel was sort of caught in the middle from time to time. But she was Hungarian, as you probably know, and bad news was my chef, who was a very good chef, was also Hungarian. So she'd walk into the hotel and go into the kitchen, and next thing I know, she'd walked out with a week's worth of groceries in her car. And this went on quite a long time. And I have to say I had an unusual, finally got it stopped, but it wasn't anything you'll ever learn at Cornell, I have to say that. But I do think that my experiences with Zsa Zsa gave me some indication of why she had so many husbands. I have to say, she was a difficult person. Now, you wonder why so many of us men don't wear ties when you go to dinner anymore? I think I had the answer back when I was in Beverly Hills. You remember the Nehru jacket? You remember how that came in style at some point in the mid-'70s? Well, all the movie people wanted to wear the Nehru jackets, and then at the Escoffier, we had a rule that said you had to wear a coat and tie. And you can hardly wear a tie with a Nehru jacket, and you can't wear a jacket over it. So, you know, in the beginning, I said, no, you've got to come back with a coat and tie on. Well, obviously, I had to give up, and I did give up. But subsequently, you know, then they quickly shifted from wearing a Nehru jacket to wearing a turtleneck. And, you know, that was done then. And so now I say that was the beginning of no ties. Anyway, we had by the time I had been there 5 years, I thought I had enough. And I was ready to be a vice president, or regional vice president for Hilton, but they weren't ready to give me that job. And they wanted me to move to Las Vegas, and I didn't think that would be a good place to raise my children. And it happened that at that time I had a call from a headhunter who found me at the right time. And I think he found me not because I was a great hotel manager, but because I had lived and worked in Minneapolis and Minnesota, and that I could live there happily. It's very difficult to get people to move from New York City or Los Angeles into Minneapolis. I can tell you from experience. The interesting thing is, it's harder to get them to move out once they live there a few years. I'm sure many of you know the name Hilton, but probably less of you know the name Radisson. But it was a single individual hotel in Minneapolis at that time. As Lee said, when I joined them, we had 9 hotels. None of them were very great, all in the Midwest. And they wanted to grow. It's a company that's was owned by Carlson Companies. Kirk Carlson was the owner, richest guy in Minnesota. And he had a number of other businesses he started with the gold bond stamps, which is like S&H green stamps. And it was a worldwide business and made a lot of money. And we owned companies that made everything from jewelry to chopsticks we made in Duluth and sent to Tokyo. And we had pre-made homes that were made up in northern Minnesota and shipped all over the world. Anyway, it was a very interesting conglomerate. One of the other businesses was TGI Fridays. And so that was an interesting company to go with. Radisson, I would say, was on the bottom end. All those companies were making some money. Radisson was not at the time that I joined them. So it caused me to have a lot of meetings with Mr. Carlson, since he managed by paying attention to the bottom of the pack, which at that time was me. At the time, I was executive vice president when I was hired. There was a president, but the problems weren't getting solved. And so the first thing that Kurt wanted to do was to build a new hotel in St. Paul, Minnesota, where 10 or 12 years before I had been managing the Hilton. And my advice to him was that the city didn't need another 400-room hotel, which was his plan. I didn't really win, but we compromised. He built a new hotel for 200 rooms and then bought the old Hilton. So that became a Radisson, so I was running it again. And then another way, I thought, well, a way to grow the company but not use so much of its money was to get some management contracts, which we did. And we went out and found quite a few interesting management contracts. One of the early ones was in Burlington, Vermont. Somebody here the other day was telling me that they had stayed there. I went out and we built the hotel, a very nice hotel with local ownership of most of the major businesses in the city, Burlington, Vermont. And so I went out and I met president of the company. By then I was president of the company and made my speech saying how delighted we were to be here in Burlington, Vermont, and that we were glad to be a part of the community, and we were going to probably hire 250 people, and we hoped that everybody would be happy with the new hotel. And then I turned to the mayor, who was a guy named Bernie Sanders. And his response to my being welcomed to the hotel was, well, it's really too bad that it wasn't built as social housing. So it wasn't his money, thankfully, and it isn't his money today either, I guess. Then the other way that we tried to grow was to do franchising. I said you could have an ownership, you could have a management contract, or you could have franchising. And we ended up getting franchising quite quickly. And I'm not trying to see if I'm getting myself screwed up. I got my watch upside down. I don't know, we might get there. So we went into franchising, and it would allow grow a lot faster, and didn't use Mr. Carlson's money, which is a very good thing. And then we felt that we needed, actually, I had to write business plan for the franchising, and I had to write the rules of what they would have to follow. I didn't have time to do it, and so I hired a guy from the Cornell Hotel School, and I said, here's basically what the Hilton does, and here's what Sheraton does. He put together the rules for what Radisson does, and we did it, and we ended up having signed up 2 hotels before we actually had the rules by which they had to run. And then we thought we needed another brand, because I thought just Radisson wasn't enough, so we came up with a Country Inn, a small hotel, usually 80 rooms, and we built the first one in Minneapolis to give it a try, and it was called Country Inns. And they had only 15 employees. They were immediately profitable, and most hotels take probably 2 or 3 years to get profitable. This was in less than a year. And then we had 2 groups going, and time to become international. And so I first went to Mexico thinking it was the closest, and found a group together that they were bankers and they owned a telephone company and others, cement company, and they formed the hotel company, and they put together Radisson Hotels. We ended up with 6. The first one was in Cancun, and it was awfully hard for me to watch that place come into the fold. The construction process was unbelievable. They dug the swimming pool by hand, and then they put the cement and tile around the pool, and then they came and they said, "Oh, we have to dig up all that tile because we forgot to dig holes for these trees, palm trees we're going to put in." And then I went back a month later, and they had put the palm trees in, but they were digging up the tile again because they had forgot that they had to put electrical wires under there to go all around the place. So, I mean, it was really something, and it was a bit of a problem. But it got us started in international business, and then I thought, well, we need to get over into the European area. Now you'd think, well, then you go to London or Paris or Rome, and well, you did try, but we didn't succeed. And the first opportunity we had was in Budapest, of all places. They were tearing down an old building, and they were leaving out the outside. And a local company wanted to put up a hotel, and we joined forces with them and put up a very nice hotel in Pest, which is the lower side of the river, and it became very successful. And the owners of it gave us good recommendations for our next effort. And business is run differently in Europe than it is here, and ownership is handled differently. And so we ended up trying to find another partner, and we ended up finding SAS Hotels. SAS Airlines had a hotel company, had about 12 or 15 hotels, and we formed a joint venture partnership, and all those hotels became Radisson. At first we called them Radisson SAS, and then we changed the name to just Radisson after, I think, 3 years, something like that. And then we ended up having hotels in, we grew to be the biggest hotel company in Germany, where they were already the biggest in Scandinavia. So Radisson was big in Scandinavia. And now that one of the names of Radisson Hotels is Radisson Blue. And the blue is because their flag for the SAS used to be a blue and white flag. So that's how that happened. And then we needed an 800 number to take care of all of these hotels all around the world. And so we ended up putting up a hotel, an 800 number in Omaha, where most of them are located. My problem was we couldn't afford to build our own hotel, our own 800 number by ourselves in a building and all of things. So we ended up renting space from a guy and using his people. And the problem was that he answered the phone only when somebody else wasn't ringing. And the biggest problem we ever had there was that when his other customers were advertising a special sale on Elvis Presley records, our phones didn't get answered and his did. So we ended up having to build our own in the end, having our 800 number down, which turned out to be a great success.
We need you to change the slide, Michael.
Not yet. Well, we're coming right now. Now you're there, just coming there. So now we're trying to develop more hotels in Europe, and I guess Russia is considered Europe, for my purposes anyway. And our executive vice president of development found a property that was about to be built in Moscow. And it was owned by the Intourist company, which owned all the hotels in Russia and all the travel agencies and a lot of other things. But at that point, they didn't have any money. And excuse me, I'm just got a little bit dizzy there. So we started our negotiations, and let me have a little drink here. And then I found that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had sent a group over to Moscow to see what kind of businesses could be found. And another group found the hotel that we had in mind. And it turned out to be a young man from, who his only job that I ever know that he ever had was raising money for the Republican Party. His name was Paul Tatum, and he was very young. And he wanted to start a business of running offices in Moscow for all the American businessmen that were going to come after the wall had fallen, which was just had fallen. And so I got a call from a guy named Bob Haldeman, another name from the past that some of you would know, who worked for Nixon as his chief of staff, I think he was. And I had known a little bit in Washington when I was there. And he was trying to help Paul Tatum, who had worked for him as a fundraiser. And we thought the idea of offices was a good one, and combined with with a hotel was an excellent one. And in those days, I don't know, when I tried to do business with the Russians that I was dealing with up until then, they didn't answer their fax machines for weeks at a time. And it turned out that they kept the fax machine in a locked closet, and only one person would have access to it, and they didn't use it very much. So anyway, that was an opportunity for offices, and we ended up making a deal to join forces with Paul Tatum. Actually, in the end, we had to loan him the money so he could be our partner, which was a little odd, but it started the most interesting part of my career for good and bad. I went up to Canada to meet with the president of the McDonald's up there, who had started to build a McDonald's in Moscow. He had worked on this project for 15 years. I didn't want to work 15 years on a one hotel project, but he was very helpful to me and telling me some of the problems that I was going to run into, and he didn't miss many. I returned the favor a few years later when Bill Marriott came to get some advice about doing business when he wanted to open a hotel in Russia. Of course, the USSR was a very different place for us to operate. The land was owned by the city. The business was owned by the Intourist, which was a federal company. And we helped our relationship with the Intourist company by the president of Intourist was a guy whose name was, I forget his name, Chernyukov, his name was. And his daughter was very, very ill, and we helped her get into Mayo Clinic to help her, and he appreciated that. So he made things a lot easier for us within Tourist. The city was run by the mayor. At first it was a guy named Popov, and then a guy named Yuri Lushkov, whose wife subsequently became the richest woman in Russia, and still is. You wonder why. Russian hotels are a pretty good example of why they needed us, because communism isn't a very good way to do it. If you would go to Russia at that time and spend, oh my goodness, I got to move up, and spend $200 at a Russian hotel, the Metropole, the hotel only got about $10 of that. The rest of it went somewhere in Russia for other purposes. And so anyway, our negotiations went on a long time. I spent a lot of time there going back and forth to Russia. And one thing that the Russians wanted was access to our 800 number, which they got with our marketing agreement. But I had said in the contract with them that our partner, that our 800 number would get all the money up front. And when they realized that the Russian partners weren't going to get the money all together, they tried very hard to get out of the deal, but it was a done deal by then. And it saved my life, I'll tell you that. It made a huge difference. They eventually did take a few $1 million out of our joint venture after it was running, just took it out of the account, the Moscow bank account. I said, when my manager called me and said that had happened, I said, that can't happen, they can't do that. He said, well, at St. Petersburg, they did it to the Swedish owning company, and they lost $21 million, so I think we got it good. Anyway, the most interesting part of our staffing was that we didn't hire any people that had ever worked in a hotel before. We ended up hiring doctors, nurses, teachers, and teaching them to be servants, teaching them to smile, which in the Russian culture seems to be that it shows weakness. And so in the end, we had a full staff, a bit more than normal. In a hotel that size in America, you'd have 400 people. And in that place, we had 400 people in the kitchen. They're not very efficient. A listening system had been planned by the Russians in the hotel they had designed. And my agreement said I had control of the design. It took a long time for me to get the listening system out of the program. But anyway, we didn't have it, and it worked pretty well. We had a good training program that I developed. I use my term I, not me, our company developed, called Yes, I Can, for the whole company. And it really worked in Russia, where the idea was to get the people at the lowest level to take the responsibility for solving the problem instead of passing it up to the next level. It worked quite well, and we had really, I would say, very good service. Everybody was bilingual or multilingual. When the CNN, George Bush, the 41, came there, it's unusual to have them stay there, but remember the embassy did have sound systems listening in the American embassy there, so he didn't want to stay there at that time. So he stayed in the Radisson, and the staff was so impressive to the CNN that they came to me and they said, well, you know, how did you do this? And I said, well, we have this Yes, I Can program that we're doing it right now. You come down and take it. So they did. They came down and looked at the way we were training our people down there. And they filmed it and ran it on the U.S. television for quite a while. Bill Clinton came when he was president and stayed with us for another reason. Not because of listening devices, but because he liked to get up in the middle of the night and have meetings. And they didn't have enough room for him at the embassy, so we got to have him with us. And we had good relations. I had good relations with the Secret Service because I'd worked with them a bit in Washington. And so we were able to keep them pretty happy there. And we had good time, with good relations with the mayor, but we didn't have such great relations with the federal government of Russia. But we did convince Gorbachev to come to Washington, Minneapolis, and have a meeting with my boss, Kurt Carlson, and with our governor. And it got us nice publicity in the United States, but didn't help Gorbachev, because shortly after that, they tried to oust him. And then the tanks were coming to the hotel. They were standing right outside. I'm in Minnesota at this point, of course, and my manager called me and says, well, we got tanks shooting guns outside our hotel. What do you want me to do? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you want me to do? And he said, we're not doing anything at this point. My partner, Paul Tatum, who had the offices, was there. He was living in Moscow, and I was very unhappy with him because he was spending all his time there and spending more money than he should, and et cetera. And I was telling him that he was going to get himself in trouble. And in fact, at one point I said, Paul, if you're not careful, you're going to get yourself killed here. But he gave some of the earliest of the cell phones, these big cell phones that we were using then, to Yeltsin, who was on top of the tanks, and it worked. I think Yeltsin ended up winning that piece of the war and became the mayor of Moscow, or president of Russia, and we worked quite well with him. My problem that happened, though, is that Paul was having problems, and I don't know what happened. We'll never know, I don't think. But he ended up getting murdered. He was called from his office in our hotel to the Kiev railroad station, which is across the street, and he went over for a meeting. He didn't wear his bulletproof vest, which he normally wore, and he didn't take his minder, which he normally did. So one wonders what he was thinking about. Anyway, he got over there, and a machine gunner shot him while Paul was going down and the other guy was going up the escalator. And of course, over there, if you're in a casket, they take your picture and put it on the front page. So there was our partner on the front page. Shortly after that, my partners in Moscow decided that I needed to have an armed guard with me wherever I traveled by car. I never figured out if they wanted to protect me or I was being protected against. But in any case, we had a lot of problems there that we had to resolve because of Paul's death. In the end, we ended up separating his business from our business. And then to end that little story, the USA Today newspaper was running a series of articles about, I got to finish. Oh, not finished. A series of articles saying that I was the one who had caused the death of my partner. And I had to hire a lawyer here in Russia, and from Russia there was an ex-ambassador. And it took a long time. Finally got the publisher to come to my office, and I think finally agreed that I wouldn't have arranged the shooting. So we didn't. The last hotel that I was going to show here is Sochi. After we got open, we got our Moscow moving right well. We opened a hotel on the Black Sea. The same kind of a deal. The city came to us and said they wanted a hotel to improve the city. Sochi, held the Olympics in '94, but we're talking here about in 2014, but we're talking about '94. So a long time. When they wanted to go, I couldn't get there by airplane. And that's how different it happened in 20 years. So we agreed that we would do it if they would build an airport and build all those kind of things. And we signed an agreement to manage a hotel. I rented an airplane from the Russian Air Force to take me down to Sochi because I couldn't get there any other way. And that plane had to go to another city whose name I can't remember and get gas before we could get to Sochi because there wouldn't be any to get back. And so we went down there, had a very contentious meeting. There was Russian money from Gazprom, the biggest gas company in the world, I think, and Turkish workers that Turkey got paid the money from Gazprom, and the Turkey sent the workers to build a hotel. So it was kind of odd. So the meetings and the board was putting together a thing. They were speaking Turkish and they were speaking Russian, and I was trying to speak English. Anyway, we had a very contentious meeting on the last one that worked there, but we did come to an agreement. Over there you have a bottle of vodka in front of everybody at the meeting, so it gets easier as the meeting goes on. And so then we finished. As we were finished the meeting, I had brought a secretary from Moscow to translate for me, and I said, "Now you have to say this exactly as I say it." And so what I was going to say wasn't going to be very nice. And she said, "Well, I can't say that." I said, "No, you have to say it exactly like that," which she did. When she got back to Moscow, she had a nervous breakdown.